Welcome to NHL Quick Hits. I'm David Crosby here with Steele Roden for a special episode to help you in your fantasy hockey drafts for the 2021-22 NHL season. Steele and I have both compiled 14 rounds of player rankings for standard league scoring, which, as a reminder, include goals, assists, points, plus minus, power play points, shots, and blocks for players, wins, goals against average, save percentage, and shutouts for goalies. So just make sure that when you're looking at these and other rankings, you know the scoring settings in your league. We'll post all of these rankings on our social media accounts for you to reference. That's at Quick NHL on Twitter and NHL Quick Hits on Instagram, and of course on our YouTube channel. Now, for this exercise, we went with a 12-team league. So each round we go through will consist of 12 picks. Instead of listing all 168 picks off for you, we're going to put them up there on the screen. You can take a look, compare what we both have, and Steele and I are going to discuss some of the more interesting choices you're going to face as you go through your draft. Positional values, overvalued and undervalued players, and then some of the players that Steele and I have ranked very differently, and believe me, there are a lot of those. So let's kick off round one, picks 1 through 12. And the big question for me, just looking at this round, is Andrei Vasilevskiy's value. Steele, you have him at 5th overall, which is pretty standard as far as rankings go and where his ADP is when he's coming off the board. I have him way down in 9th, where he'd almost surely be gone. There's almost no chance I'd have the ability to draft him there at 9th. Why are you taking him over some of the league's best scorers like Austin Matthews and Mikko Rantanen?
Well, I think he's as valuable as some of those top guys, not as much as valuable as Connor McDavid, obviously, because he's just once-in-a-lifetime type of player. But when you're looking at guys like Nikita Kucherov, Leon Draisaitl, even Nathan MacKinnon, he's as valuable as those guys. And in the ESPN fantasy, they projected him to have 349 fantasy points this season because he's just that good, and he's so good at his job. You know, just like I said, talking about Connor McDavid, he was projected to have 319.4 fantasy points in ESPN. So in ESPN, goalies get a lot of points depending on what type of league you're in, you know, whether you're using shutouts, wins, save percentage, goals against average, like you said. So there's a lot of different variables that come into play with those ESPN that differentiate from the Yahoo rankings. But he's just one of those top valuable guys that you can't go wrong and you can't miss out on an opportunity of getting him. Like I said, he's one of those top guys, and he's as valuable as a guy like Nathan MacKinnon. A guy like Andrei Vasilevskiy, he's going to be playing 65, 70, 75% of the games this season, which is around 60 to 65 games. So you know he's going to be getting 35-plus wins. You know his goals against average and save percentage is going to be one of the highest in the league. You know he's going to be averaging around 3 to 6 shutouts this season, which he's done over the last 4 seasons combined as well. So he's one of those top valuable goalies that if you have the opportunity to get him in the 5th or 6th pick, you have to take him at that opportunity. You can't miss a guy like that.
Yeah, I love that explanation. Definitely hands down the best goalie in the NHL and the best fantasy goalie. Frankly, unless you're in a league that has 14 to 16 teams, he is the only goalie that is good enough to go in the first round. And believe me, he will go in the first round of every draft that you're in. Let's move on to round 2, picks 13 through 24. Not to jump over round 1 there, but like we mentioned, there's just so many great players in there. If you're getting picks 1 through 4, you're getting one of the elite scorers in the league. Anywhere else, you're looking at either getting one of the 10 best forwards in the NHL, or maybe like Steele did, grabbing the best defenseman in the league. Steele, let's talk about some of those defensemen who picks 13 through 24. I had Makar 16th. That's Cale Makar, who had a fantastic season for Colorado. Of course, it got cut short a little bit by injury. John Carlson at 18th. Adam Fox at 19th, who, of course, was named the top defenseman in the league last year. And Victor Hedman at 20th. You also had Hedman at 22nd. And like I mentioned, Makar at 12th. You actually had him ranked at the last pick of the first round. So Steele, you personally, when you're going into a draft, how do you decide where you're going to target your top D-man?
Well, it all comes with my first pick, and my first pick is usually a top forward, and it all depends on what place I'm actually picking in. So if I have the 2nd or 3rd overall pick, let's say in the draft, I'm picking one of the top forwards. I'm picking a guy like Nathan McKinnon. I'm picking a guy like Austin Matthews or Leon Draisaitl, because obviously Connor McDavid's going first. So I'm always picking a top forward with my first overall pick in the draft, and that will determine who I pick with my second round pick, which is usually a defenseman. What I like to do is I like to pair my second pick with my first pick. So let's say I pick Alex Ovechkin as my fifth overall pick. I get all the way down to number 18, 19 in the snake draft, and John Carlson's still available. And I know John Carlson and Alex Ovechkin are be on the first power play unit. I know John Carlson's probably going to get over 45 assists, probably over 50 assists, and he's also probably going to average around 15 to 20 goals like he did last season. So I like to add guys who are on the same team with my first overall pick and who are top guys as a forward and as a defenseman. That's what I personally like to do. I like to pair the guys up, but I think obviously you have to take a defenseman with your second or third round pick. I like to jump the gun a little bit early with my second pick in the draft, but that's what I like to do. I like to pair up guys that are play well together and on the same team.
All right, so of course we mentioned we had Hedman pretty close to around the same spot. Makar, you were a little bit ahead of me, but I don't think it's too early by any means to get the what I would also consider the best defenseman in the league. So between John Carlson and Adam Fox, do you think I'm reaching a little bit on one of those two players, taking them in the second?
I think you're reaching a little bit on Adam Fox. I think John Carlson, obviously with the experience that he has, obviously again credits to Adam Fox for his efforts last season. What an unbelievable season he had, winning the Norris Trophy. Obviously, I think it's jumping the gun a little bit. I think waiting till the late third round for Adam Fox, maybe even early third round for Adam Fox, is a better decision. That's just personally where I come from. I would rather take a guy like John Carlson or Victor Hedman over a guy like Adam Fox.
So let's go back to the forward group. Let's talk about a player that I've seen ranked way above his production in the past few seasons, and that's Brady Tkachuk. He always has obscene shot totals. So we mentioned standard scoring, they're counting shots. You're definitely going to get a lot of help from Brady Tkachuk in that category. But to me, looking at it, the points, they're just not close to that elite level. When you look at the kind of talent that is available in the second round, and you're taking somebody like Brady Tkachuk, who's just over half a point per game, to me, that just doesn't add up. So to you, taking him where you did, 21st, I had him down at 29th. Not a huge difference there, but I do feel like the second and the third round, there is a bit of a gap there in talent. So do you see it being the season that he explodes offensively this year, or are you just banking on similar numbers and you want to dominate that shot category and think he might pot a couple extra goals?
I do think he explodes this year, and I'm expecting a career high in points this season from a guy like Brady Tkachuk. I think he's, again, one of those guys that brings a lot to the table, and especially depending on what your league settings are, like we've talked about, if you have shots, if you have hits, if you have blocks, those hits and blocks will bring a lot of points to your fantasy team. That's what excites me a lot. When you're talking about a guy like Brady Tkachuk and you have the opportunity in your league where you have those categories that can help you out a lot, like hits and blocks, you have to take a chance on a guy like Brady Tkachuk because he loves to shoot the puck. He loves to run guys into the board. He just has this game that reminds me a lot of a combination of Austin Matthews and Tom Wilson, where he loves shooting the puck on net, but he loves running guys into the boards, and that helps your fantasy team. And it's a match made in heaven for me. So if your league has hits and it has blocks, this guy is projected to have over 325 hits this season, which is 60 more than the next guy, which I believe is Brandon Tanev. So if you have hits in your league, Brady Tkachuk is a guy to go to because he has a lot of skill. We've seen the skill. We've seen the potential. And again, like I said, I think he's going to have his best career yet this season. So Brady Tkachuk, 21 to 26 in that area, that's where I would like to see him.
I think if I'm in a banger league, it's got hits, it's got penalty minutes, I would probably have Brady Tkachuk up around that same level, maybe even higher than you do, up around the early 20s. Now, this is also around where some of the other top-ranked goaltenders start to come off the board. Connor Hellebuyck, of course, great goalie. He's been really, really consistent. He's probably coming off the board here in the second. Not a bad choice late in the second round. But let's move on to round 3, picks 25 to 36. And the most controversial pick in this round might be my ranking of Quinn Hughes at 33. You've got him down at 46. So what is it about Quinn Hughes that scares you off? Is it the low goal total, the low shot total, maybe that Vancouver struggled last year? Because I see somebody who was battling neck and neck with Cale Makar there in their rookie season. And to me, he's already one of the 10 best offensive defensemen in the league, and he's got a lot of room to grow. I think if he can even add 5-6 goals to that total, he could be one of the best defensemen in the league. Why are you waiting until the next round, Steele?
I think it's all three of those reasons, but also the fact that like I said before, I think there's some better defensemen that can be chosen before Quinn Hughes. Like again, like we mentioned, or like you mentioned, I would rather take a guy like Adam Fox in the early or late third round, right there, over a guy like Quinn Hughes. The goals really scare me a lot. Goals are a huge part of fantasy league, and they bring a lot of points to this for your team. And Quinn Hughes, to me, getting 8 goals the last 2 seasons has not really cut it. But again, it's really just the fact that there's a lot of defensemen and a lot more players that I would like to choose before a guy like Quinn Hughes for my fantasy team. Also, the fact that I think the Vancouver Canucks are in a little bit of a tougher division for the team that they have this season, or have the team that they have this year. So again, it's not the fact that I don't like Quinn Hughes. He's a great young defenseman. It's just the fact that I believe there's some better players out there that would help my team be better.
I kind of love the spot that Hughes is in because he's the only one I've got ranked kind of in that tier. If you're looking at Steele's board right now, he is another defenseman who might sneak a little bit lower. That's Dougie Hamilton. He's been really great, but in a new team in New Jersey, they weren't very good last year. They struggled to put the puck in the net. He might be somebody that people overlook, and you might be able to get late in this round or even in the next round, and he could possibly have just as good or better season than Quinn Hughes. Let's talk about one of the elite scorers now in the league and what you think Kirill Kaprizov's ceiling is. I've got him ranked in the second round at 21st. You've got him at 30th in the middle of the third round. Is there any chance he cracks the top 10 overall in fantasy scoring? I love his floor. I don't see any way he falls lower than 30th, but I'm bumping him up to the second round because I think he's got top 10 potential.
I'm not quite sure if he's got top 10 potential. It's definitely something to look forward to in the next couple of years. But as of this year, I don't think he's quite there yet. And I think the 30th spot is the perfect position for him. You know, Yahoo and fantasy hockey has averaged him at around the 29th pick. ESPN has him ranked at the 33rd pick. And I just think the 30th pick is the best spot for him. And you know this, I love this guy. I love the Minnesota Wild. He brings a lot to the table. I just believe that there's going to be a lot of pressure on him after getting that contract. And obviously, you know, when we're speaking of guys like Connor McDavid, Nathan McKinnon, some of those top guys who can make the plays happen for their teammates around them, and even then just do things themselves. I know Kirill Kaprizov is capable of that, but I'm not sure if the team around him is as capable as him right now. I love the Minnesota Wild. I love the team they have. They fight. They're a hardworking team. I'm just not quite sure if he has the assets as much as the other teams around him have.
Well, most team owners see it the way you do, so I guess I'm probably going to be owning Kirill the Thrill in just about every league if I leave him ranked there in the low 20s. Let's move on to round 4, Steele. Picks 37 to 48. And there's another player that I think has been coming off draft boards way too early, but you seem to like his value. Is Alex DeBrincat an elite fantasy winger? You have him ranked at 28th. I dropped him all the way down to 47.
I believe he is elite. I think he's such an underrated and overlooked player. Great handles, great vision. He's got a great shot. He plays with Patrick Kane. Jonathan Toews is coming back into the lineup. You add Seth Jones and Tyler Johnson into that slot with them too, and there's your first power play unit. So I think with Alex DeBrincat being a top winger, if you compare him up with guys like Jonathan Toews, who you might take later in the draft, or maybe even if you pick Patrick Kane with your first pick in the first round, then it really depends on when you take a guy like Alex DeBrincat. But I think 28th to 33rd is where I would like to see him go at. I took him at 28th just to pair him up with a guy like Patrick Kane that goes in the first round. You can't go wrong with him. He's a great player. And again, the same thing with Brady Tkachuk. I think he might have a career year this year.
Chicago's one of the more interesting teams to look at for fantasy because their defense got so much better. A guy like Seth Jones is probably going to be taking some of those shots on the power play. Jonathan Taves might come back. Kirby Dach could step into a top six role. I'm just a little bit nervous at taking DeBrincat that high. He's kind of been inconsistent as well. Now, obviously, he's got a great floor. His rookie season, he had about 0.6 points per game, neared that point per game mark there in his second year, fell back down though to 45 points in 70 games 2 seasons ago, and then of course back above a point per game in that shortened season. I could see him maybe falling back just a little bit, maybe not as far as he did in that third season, but I don't think he's worth taking at this point when I look around and see all of the great players that are still on the board. Here's a situational question for you, Steele. And probably at this point in the draft, depending on where we would have been slotted, we might not have a goalie yet. We've been talking about just about every player but goalies. So let's say you and I, we both got to this point in the draft and neither of us had a goalie so far. Do you need to pounce on your first goalie in this draft if you've waited this long?
Yes, it is. And like I said before, this is usually when I would pick my first goalie in the draft. I like making my first pick my forward. I like trying to pair up my second pick with a defenseman on the same team. And then I go after my first goalie, which is a top tier goalie. And, you know, at this point, there's still going to be a lot available besides guys like Andrei Vasilevskiy and Connor Hellebuyck, who are probably going to be the first two goalies taken off the board. You have pretty much the entire rest of the league to choose from, goalies wise. So you need to pounce on starters before you get stuck with guys who are only playing 25 games a year. So top goalies have a huge say in whether your fantasy team is a top contender or just your average Joe team. So the perfect time to pick your goalie, and it must be a goalie who's playing 65% of the games this season.
I think this is the sweet spot as well. We both had Marc-Andre Fleury, last year's Vezina winner, there in the early 40s. Igor Shesterkin, kind of a fantasy darling, maybe not the breakout you wanted from him last year, but I think a lot of people feel pretty confident that it's going to come this year on a Rangers team that should be a lot more responsible defensively. Semyon Varlamov in there, Andersen moving over to Carolina, a team that historically in the last few seasons has been really, really good defensively. I have Jack Campbell down at the 48 spot too. I think that, you know, he's going to be given that chance, like we talked about on an episode a week or two ago, to grab that number one job on one of the better teams in the league. Here's the question I have for you though, Steele. The last pick in the fourth round, you've got Juuse Saros from Nashville and Frederick Andersen from Carolina left on the board. Of course, you would have Frederick Andersen there at 45th. I've got him way down at 55th. I'd be comfortable taking Saros as high up as 43rd. And frankly, I almost ranked him quite a bit higher than that. I think he's a sneaky Vezina candidate this year. Why do you want Andersen over a guy like Saros?
Well, for me, it's more of a gut/personal feeling. I trust the Carolina Hurricanes defensively over the Nashville Predators. I think over the last couple of seasons, they've really let Saros down, especially when it comes to the playoffs and towards the end of this end of the regular season, where he just keeps getting beat, and it just seems like there's no one there to help him out. So for me, I like the responsibility more from the Carolina Hurricanes defensively, even though they've lost Dougie Hamilton and Jake Bean and guys like that. It might be a little bit. They might be a little bit weaker on the blue line from last year. But again, you have guys who are on forward who can come back and really help you out defensively. So I trust the Carolina Hurricanes responsibly more defensively than I do the Nashville Predators. But again, this is no disrespect to Juuse Saros. I think he's a young, unbelievably young, talented goaltender. I would rather choose Frederick Andersen in this situation.
And I think that's totally fair to look at their team. And I think you'd be hard pressed to find somebody that would say Nashville will be a better team than Carolina. But Andersen's injury history, how he struggled statistically the last few seasons, when I look at Juuse Saros and how consistent he's been year in, year out. You mentioned his team letting him down. Well, he had a .927 save percentage last year. That is absolutely elite. And I think he is one of the 5 best goalies in the league and maybe even one of the 3 best. But I guess we'll need to see him in that starting role now that Pekka Rinne has retired to see if he can handle that larger load. On to round 5 now, Steele. Picks 49 to 60 with all the big names out there. I think it's easy to go the first 5 rounds, maybe without picking a defenseman or picking just one. And we both think there are some borderline first defensemen who might be available in this round. Personally, I'm not ready to take them here. Who to you is worth a gamble with this pick that you think could be a number one defenseman? Here's a trio that you've got ranked in this round. Aaron Ekblad at 49th overall. I dropped him down to 74. Morgan Rielly at 53rd. I had him in the mid 70s as well. And Charlie McAvoy at 55. Same thing at 73 for me. So why do you have these three guys ranked so much higher and you're comfortable taking them here?
Well, I think it's the fact of the way I draft my players. I think at this point, I'm looking to grab my second defenseman, if possible, depending on where my draft pick is. But I think Aaron Ekblad by far is the best defenseman to take a gamble on in this round. You know, he had 22 points in 35 games last season with 100 shots on net. And looking at their power play situation, the Florida Panthers were top 15 on the power play in 2020 without Aaron Ekblad for more than half the season. I believe Aaron Ekblad will be way better in the lineup this season with the Florida Panthers on the power play as well, just being in the lineup in general. I think he adds a lot of things that they didn't have last season when they lost him to that horrific injury. So I think Aaron Ekblad is definitely a huge gamble to take on, but I believe he's going to exceed expectations, and I believe he will exceed my expectations coming this season.
And I think that's all fair. It's definitely a matter of value. And like you said, some people like to draft positionally. They don't like to wait too long and have these huge holes in their lineup and then maybe get stuck holding the bag and after roster 2-3 guys who are well below average. So that's all fair. To me, though, those three guys, I just don't think they're worth the value here. I think their name is bigger than their fantasy production. I think Ekblad coming back from that injury. I think Rielly has that reputation as a number one D-man, but I don't think statistically he's really up there with a lot of the other guys. And Charlie McAvoy, that's the toughest one to call for me. I had him ranked to ahead of the other two, but I just think we haven't seen enough from him. The body of work just isn't big enough to risk a pick this high on him. One guy I think I would go for here is Roman Josi. I'm frankly surprised that he's being drafted in this round, and I think he could be a sneaky good pick if you can get him in this range. Moving on to round 6, pick 61 to 72. Is this an ideal spot to target your second goalie or maybe even back-to-back goalies if you haven't drafted one yet? Of course, in fantasy football, the zero running back strategy became really popular. Some people do this in fantasy hockey as well. There's a lot of surefire starters who go late in the draft, might not be on a good team, might not have good stats before, but it could be an advantage for you to stack your lineup early on and then just go with a couple goalies later on. So I have 6 goalies ranked between 53 and 72. And Steele, you have 7 between 54 and 69. So is this the type of spot you're looking to get your second goalie?
Again, you can kind of see the way I'm setting up my draft here, and it's very personal to the way I like things run when I'm picking my fantasy team. And yeah, I think this is the perfect time to pick your second goalie because there's still a lot of top tier starter goalies that are still in this round that are available. Like guys like, for instance, that I chose to leave in this particular round: Juuse Saros, Carey Price, Cam Talbot, Jack Campbell, Philip Grubauer. A lot of still other names that are out there, but those are some of the names that I picked that were in this round. And again, and like I said, this goalies make or break you in fantasy NHL league. They really do. They bring a lot to the table with wins, save percentage, goals against average, shutouts, saves in general. So I think having 2 top tier goalies on your fantasy team is huge for the program. You need goalies who play 3-4 times a week, and that play 65-70% of the games in the season. So again, I think this round is perfect to grab your second goalie. And those names I just listed, like Juuse Saros, Carey Price, and Cam Talbot, those are the guys to look for.
Yeah, it's really interesting because let's say in most leagues, 4 of your 11 categories, which is pretty standard, would be for the goalies. And you might have 2-3 goalies on your team. That's 35% of your weekly point totals. And I think people have this perception that goaltending is so random, and especially with save percentage and goals against average and even shutouts, that maybe there's not as much control as you get with drafting forwards and defensemen. But if you look statistically at some of the goalies, you can really find a guy that maybe has a super high floor that week in and week out, he is going to get you at least average to above average stats. And like you said, that can be a huge advantage if you have 2 or even 3 really good fantasy goalies. Let's talk about a player with a huge variance in how his seasons could go. Steele, you've got Evgeny Kuznetsov ranked 67th, which is pretty close to where he's projected to go and his average draft position. That's kind of standard. I couldn't bring myself to put him in the top 100 with all the questions going on with him. He seems to be up and down. Full disclosure, I drafted him in a league last year. He was really disappointing for me. He didn't nearly meet expectations, but then you've got Nicholas Backstrom potentially being injured to start the season. Maybe he gets a shot with a lot of minutes right off the bat. So why do you like him in the late 60s?
Yeah, it was clearly a down season for Kuznetsov last year with 29 points. Obviously, COVID-19 played a part of that and him missing 16 games of the season. Exactly what happened with Ilya Samsonov last season, where we talked about this, where I believe that he's still going to be the starting goalie. He was going to be the starting goalie last season, but COVID-19 happened, where he got COVID-19 and was out for a couple weeks, and then it just took him a while to get his stamina back up and actually get back into the game and into the groove of things. So again, I think a lot happened last year where it affected the Washington Capitals, and it really affected those 2 guys in particular. And looking back at it now, I think you're right. I think the 67th is a little bit too premature, a little too early to pick a guy like Evgeny Kuznetsov. Now looking at it, I would feel more comfortable picking him in the range of 85 to 95. I think over 100 or waiting after 100 is a little late for him. I think he can still be very productive. And I think a lot of things just happened last year where it really affected his game and his playing style. So I think waiting to around 85 to 95 in that area is the perfect time to pick him. I was a little bit premature in this area, picking him 67. So I would listen to David Crosby on this one.
Well, and that's well said too, because a lot of people, they rank their players, and they kind of get locked into that. But keep in mind, we're doing this at the end of September. So hopefully we'll have an episode before many drafts go on. Some of the players we've moved up and down our boards as we get closer, news comes out, lineups are shared. You learn a lot of information as things go on. So you have to be flexible and you have to be willing to move guys around your board as you get closer to your draft. In the final round of this episode, round 7, picks 73 to 84. Speaking of variance, Steele, we both have Jack Eichel in this round. You had him 79. I had him 80. Of course, we did this ranking blind. We did not compare our lists until after they were done. So for us to have him in pretty much the same spot is kind of incredible. He was probably the hardest player on the entire board for me to rank, because on one hand, you don't want to miss out on a guy who has top 10 potential. He's one of the best forwards in the league when he's healthy. But do you really want to spend your 7th round pick on a guy who he might not even play this year? We have no idea what's going to happen with Jack Eichel and Buffalo. So what are the chances you think we would regret taking him here in the 7th round?
There's a high percentage. It's a big gamble that you and I are taking here with the 79th, 80th pick in round 7. So exactly what you said. We don't really know what the situation and what's going on in Buffalo with this whole Jack Eichel situation. We don't know when he's going to have surgery, if he's going to have surgery, if he's going to come back and play for Buffalo, if he gets traded. So there's so many things so many questions that are going on in my mind right now, and what I'm trying to think of. I think it would be a mistake to miss out on a guy like Jack Eichel. It is a gamble though, because we don't know what's going to happen. I think take the chance, put him right under your IR if you have an IR spot, and just kind of leave it with that, because you can still pick up some really strong, skilled guys in the later rounds, even though they're not going to live up to that potential where you could have possibly picked a guy that could have a lot of effect in the 7th round if you missed out or if you picked Jack Eichel. Again, so I think it's a big gamble to take. If you take him, you can put him right on your IR right away. But again, we don't know what the situation is right now. We don't really know what's going to happen. So it's just a gamble at this point.
And we mentioned the scoring settings off the top. I'm glad you mentioned that IR spot. If you have multiple IR or IR plus spots, it gives you that opportunity to draft a guy who might spend the first few weeks of the season, maybe even potentially longer on your IR, because if you don't have one of those, or you only have one IR spot, you don't want to have a guy taking that up for the first 2 months of the season, because anybody else on your team gets injured and all of a sudden you've got a lot shorter bench than everybody else in the league. Now let's talk about a couple other players here in this round. This guy got paid this offseason, but he's being paid for his obscene potential in my mind. Steele, it seems like you are a Miro Heiskanen believer. You have him ranked at 77th. I don't think he's quite ready to be a great fantasy defenseman yet, which is why I have him down at 93rd. Why are you snatching him up in this round?
Look, we talked about this before, and I gave him some grief too about the size of this contract, because we talked about this. If he's getting $9 million, what the heck is Cale Makar going to be getting? So again, I gave him some grief about this contract. There's a lot of pressure on him, exactly the same way there's some pressure on Kirill Kaprizov with the contract he just got. But again, yeah, I am a believer. I believe in this guy, and I believe he's going to have his best seasons yet this upcoming season. I think, again, he's just a young, talented guy who got a little lost last season after a bad playoff run 2 seasons ago. So I think he got a little lost last season. I think coming up in 2021-22, he's going to be a lot better. He's going to be a lot more better for the fantasy team. And I think taking him in this round would be a great decision for me and for whoever takes him.
Well, maybe the player I'm most excited to watch this upcoming season, and definitely my front runner for Rookie of the Year, is Cole Caufield. I've got him ranked 83rd, and Steele, I'm going to kind of go off the board before we get to our next round and let the fans know that you had him ranked 109th. So let me make the case for drafting him here. There was a lot of talk from Trevor Zegras and around the NHL. He had him pegged in for 40 goals. Do I think Cole Caufield's going to get 40 goals as a rookie? No, I don't. But I do think he could get 30. He could maybe get mid-30s even. I think he could be the focal point on Montreal's offense. And just when you look at what they've lost since going to the Stanley Cup last year, coming into this season, they no longer have Shea Weber. They no longer have their number 2 center, Philip Deneau. There are a lot of offensive opportunities and shots and chances and ice time for Cole Caufield to come in and really make an impact. So to me, he is one of the highest ceiling guys left at this point in the draft. Did I change your mind at all, or are you a little bit too scared to take him this early?
David, you changed my mind even before we hopped on this Zoom call. I was clearly wrong leaving him out to 109, but I do have to disagree with you at taking him at 83. So I would like to meet in the middle at 96. I think the 90 to 96 range would be the perfect spot to pick a guy like Cole Caufield after looking at exactly what you said, what they lost, what they gained this season, the type of spot that Montreal is putting him in on the top line with Tyler Toffoli and Nick Suzuki, who he played really well with in the playoffs last season. Again, you did change my mind even before we even got onto this call. He's going to be playing top power play units. He's projected to have 159 fantasy points again. So I think you've got me here. You got to listen to David Crosby on this one. I think a guy like Cole Caufield can really help your fantasy team in this round.
Yeah, you mentioned early on in this video how valuable goals can be, and this guy just scores goals. Every single place that he plays, he scores goals, and I'm glad that you mentioned his potential line mates, because it's really exciting what could happen with those three. I think all three of them are ranked a little bit too low right now. And I think you're right, taking him in the 90s. Right now, his average draft position is 104th. If you have a big Montreal Canadiens fan, maybe he doesn't quite get that far, but you're probably safe to wait until the 90s to snatch up Cole Caufield. That's all for this episode, but be sure to tune in for the second half of our fantasy drafts, as we'll be going through rounds 8 to 14 next time. It's really easy to draft in the first 7 rounds. Every player is a great player, but you really win your fantasy drafts in the last few rounds, because that is where you can get those hidden gems and those guys that nobody else is looking for. On behalf of Steel Road, I'm David Crosby, and thanks for tuning in to NHL Quick Hits.